She was summoned at midnight to deliver a Mafia boss's secret child, and by dawn the mother was dead, the truth was buried, and Maria Bianchi belonged to Vittorio Russo. Bound by a contract, a lie, and a baby that wasn't hers, she never meant to fall for the coldest, most dangerous man in Boston. But in a world of poison, betrayal, and blood, the deadliest enemy wears a familiar face, and love may cost everything to survive. You are listening to a story exclusively narrated on the Dark Romance Stories channel. Relax and step into the world of love stories filled with mystery, emotions, and passion. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment to support us. This content is the property of Dark Romance Stories. Please do not copy or re-upload it in any form. The phone rang at 11:58, and Maria Bianchi knew before she answered that someone was going to die. Not because she was psychic, because no one called an obstetrician at that hour with good news in their voice. She had learned the sound of dread over 11 years of practice, the particular way a caller breathed, the pauses that were really prayers. This voice, low and male and edged with something colder than fear, had all of it. "Dr. Bianchi?" Not a question. "You are needed, tonight. There will be a car outside your building in 6 minutes. She sat up in the dark of her small Beacon Hill apartment, the streetlight through the blinds striping her bare arm. "Who is this? I don't take private calls. If there's an emergency, go to Mass General. I can meet you there. No hospitals." The words landed like a door closing. No records, no names. You will be paid more than you make in a year, and you will be safe, and you will save a woman and a child if God allows it. 6 minutes, doctor. Please. The please was what undid her. It came out wrong in his mouth, like a word he had not used in a long time and had to retrieve from somewhere buried. Maria should have hung up. She knew that even then, standing in her kitchen pulling scrubs over her camisole, her hands moving faster than her judgment, she should have called the police. Instead, she packed her emergency bag, the one she was not supposed to have, the one every doctor secretly keeps, and she was on the sidewalk in 5 minutes, her breath clouding in the March cold, when the car arrived. It was black, long, expensive in the quiet way that meant real money rather than borrowed. A man in a dark coat opened the rear door without a word. She looked at his face and saw nothing there she could use later. No scar, no tell, just a professional blankness that frightened her more than a snarl would have. "Where are we going?" she asked, as the city slid past the tinted glass. "You'll see when we arrive," the driver said. They drove 20 minutes north, past the harbour, into a district of converted warehouses and glass towers that had risen where the fish markets used to be. The car pulled into a private garage beneath a building she didn't recognise. And then she was in an elevator that required a key, rising, her ears popping, until the doors opened onto a penthouse that took her breath. Floor-to-ceiling glass, the whole city laid out below like scattered jewels. White marble, black leather, a grand piano no one had ever played, standing in the corner like a coffin. And the smell. Beneath the lilies in their enormous vases, beneath the wealth, she caught it. Blood, fear sweat, the animal reek of a body in crisis. "Through here," the blank-faced man again. The bedroom was chaos dressed as luxury. A woman lay on the enormous bed, sheets soaked crimson beneath her, her face the grey white of old candles, her dark hair plastered to her skull with sweat. She was young, impossibly young, 24 at most, and she was very clearly dying. And standing over her, motionless, was the most dangerous-looking man Maria had ever seen. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, dressed in a black shirt open at the collar. His face was carved from something harder than flesh, a straight nose, a hard mouth, eyes so dark they seemed to have no bottom. He did not look at Maria when she entered. He looked at the woman on the bed as though he could keep her alive by force of will alone. "Sir," Maria said, dropping her bag and moving fast, "you need to step out. Now." He turned those bottomless eyes on her. "I stay. You will contaminate a sterile field, and you will get in my way, and she will die faster. Out." She was already snapping on gloves, already reading the woman's body, the pallor, the pulse fluttering at her throat like a trapped bird, the blood. God, the blood. "How long has she been labouring?" 9 hours. A woman's voice from the doorway, older, silver-haired, elegant in a way that suggested she'd learned it late. "We couldn't move her. He wouldn't let us call anyone." Maria's hands were on the girl's abdomen now, feeling the fetal position, the tightness, the wrongness, placental abruption, almost certainly. The placenta tearing away from the wall of the womb, the mother bleeding into herself, the baby starving of oxygen with every second. "I need to deliver this baby in the next few minutes, or we lose both of them," Maria said, her voice going flat and clinical, the voice that had carried her through 100 emergencies. "I can't do a section here. I'm going to try to bring the baby out. Sir, out. Everyone but her." She jerked her chin at the silver-haired woman. The man did not move. The girl on the bed opened her eyes. They were a startling green, the only living colour left in her. "Vittorio," she whispered, and Maria understood in a cold rush exactly whose penthouse she was standing in. Vittorio Russo. She had seen the name in the Globe, in the careful articles that never quite said Mafia, but circled it like water around a drain. Racketeering charges dropped, witnesses who forgot what they'd seen. A man the city both feared and pretended not to know. "I'm here," Vittorio said, and crossed to the bed and took the dying girl's hand. "Promise me," Sophia said. Maria would learn her name later, would learn all of it later. Too late. "Promise me you'll keep the baby safe. From all of them. Even from—" A contraction seized her, and she screamed, and blood pulsed fresh onto the sheets, and Maria stopped listening to anything but the body under her hands. "Push," Maria commanded. "Sophia, look at me. You push when I say. Do you understand? One more time. For the baby. Push." She pushed. The room narrowed to the space between Maria's hands. Somewhere a monitor she'd clipped on was screaming about a heart rate crashing. Somewhere Vittorio Russo was murmuring in Italian, low and desperate, words that might have been prayers or might have been threats against God himself. And then, in a rush of blood and fluid and Maria's own held breath, the baby came. A boy. Blue-grey, silent, terrifyingly still. Maria had him in her hands, suctioning, rubbing, her whole body bent to the single task of making this small, wet creature choose to live. "Come on," she hissed. "Come on, come on," he cried. The sound tore through the penthouse, thin, furious, alive. Maria's eyes stung. She clamped the cord, cut it, wrapped him in the cleanest sheet she could grab, and turned to hand him to his mother. But Sophia's green eyes had gone fixed and empty, staring at the glass ceiling and the city lights beyond, and the monitor was no longer screaming. It had gone quiet, one long, flat tone. "No," Vittorio said. Just that. No. As though he could refuse it. Maria worked on her anyway, compressions, everything she had, for 11 minutes, while the baby cried and the silver-haired woman wept, and Vittorio Russo stood over them like a statue of grief. But Sophia Kane was gone. She had held on exactly long enough to hear her son cry, and then she had let go. When Maria finally sat back, her scrubs soaked through, her hands shaking, she looked up at the man whose world she had just failed to save. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry. The bleeding, it was too fast. There was nothing—" "Stop." He was not looking at her. He was looking at the baby, still crying in Maria's arms, red-faced and alive and utterly unaware. Something moved behind Vittorio's eyes, something that made the hair rise on Maria's neck. Not just grief, calculation, fear. "Give him to me," Vittorio said. And that was the moment. She would think about it for the rest of her life, that Maria Bianchi should have run. They did not let her leave. It was not violence, not at first. It was worse than violence, in a way. It was politeness. The silver-haired woman, who introduced herself only as Renata, brought Maria coffee in a cup that cost more than Maria's monthly grocery bill, and told her, gently, that Mr. Russo required a moment of her time before she could go. The moment lasted until dawn. They had taken her phone. They had taken it the way a nurse takes a scalpel, smoothly, before she'd even registered the hand. Maria sat in the vast white living room with the dead woman's blood drying under her fingernails and the newborn asleep in a bassinet that had appeared from somewhere, and she watched the sky over Boston turn from black to bruised violet to a thin, exhausted gold. Vittorio Russo came to her at 6:30. He had changed his shirt. He had not slept. He sat across from her in a low leather chair and studied her face for a long moment, and Maria made herself hold his gaze, because she had learned as a woman in a world of men that flinching was how you told them you were prey. "You saved my son," he said. "I couldn't save his mother." No one could have saved his mother. He said it with a strange, flat certainty that she filed away without understanding it. "You did what a hospital could not have done faster. I know the difference. I have buried people who died waiting for ambulances." "I'm sorry for your loss," Maria said, because it was true, and because she did not know what else could be true in this room. Vittorio leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and now she could see how tired he was, how the grief had hollowed him out and left something harder in its place. "Dr. Bianchi, I'm going to tell you a truth, and then I'm going to ask you for something, and you are going to find that you cannot say no, not because I will hurt you, I will not hurt you, but because the situation will not permit it." That sounds, Maria said carefully, like a threat wearing a nice coat. The corner of his mouth moved, not a smile, but the memory of where one used to be. You're not afraid of me. I'm terrified of you. I've just found that being terrified isn't very useful, so I'm choosing to ignore it. He looked at her then, really looked, the way a man looks at something he had not expected to find in a place like this. Maria felt it like a hand on her skin, and hated that she felt it. My son, he said, cannot exist. Do you understand? The moment my enemies learn that Sophia gave me a child, an heir, he becomes the most valuable and the most endangered thing in this city. There are men who would take him to use against me. There are men who would kill him simply because killing him would wound me, and wounding me is worth a great deal to them. He paused. Sophia knew this. She hid the pregnancy. Only 3 people alive knew she carried my child. Now there are 4. I won't tell anyone, Maria said quickly. Doctor-patient. There was no patient. There's no record. I'll forget the address. I'll forget your face. I don't want your silence, doctor. Silence I can buy from anyone. He stood and moved to the window and looked out at the city he apparently owned. I want your name, on a document, as his mother. Maria stared at his back. What? A child appears in my life, a newborn. Questions will be asked by my associates, by my enemies, by the state. The cleanest answer, the answer no one can pull apart, is a wife and a child, a marriage, a woman of respectable profession, a doctor no less, who married Vittorio Russo quietly and gave him a son. No mistress, no Sophia, no thread for anyone to pull. You want me to marry you? Maria heard her own voice climb. You want me to sign my name to a lie and pretend a dead woman's baby is mine and live in the mansion of a man the FBI has a file on? Are you insane? I have a life. I have patience. I have a career I spent a decade building. I have a mother in Revere who calls me every Sunday. Your mother, Vittorio said quietly, will be safer if you say yes than if you say no. The room went very still. Maria stood up. Her legs shook, but she stood. There it is, the threat. He turned, and to her surprise, there was something almost like shame in his eyes, quickly buried. No, listen to me. I am not threatening your mother. I am telling you the truth of the world you walked into at midnight. You have seen my son. You have seen my dead lover. You know my face and my home. To my enemies, you are already a thread. If I let you walk out of here and go back to your apartment and your Sunday phone calls, they will find you within the month, and they will not ask you politely. The only way I can protect you now, the only way, is to bring you inside, where my walls are, where my men are. He exhaled. I did not choose this for you. You chose it when you answered the phone, but I will not pretend the choice isn't already made. Maria wanted to scream that it wasn't fair, that she had answered the phone to save a life, that no good deed should end in a marriage contract with a crime lord. But she looked at the bassinet, at the small, furious creature sleeping in it, the baby she had pulled from death with her own 2 hands, the baby whose first breath she had personally coaxed out of him, and something in her chest turned over. Show me the contract, she heard herself say. Renata brought it on heavy cream paper. It was, Maria realized as she read, terrifyingly thorough. a prenuptial agreement, a private trust, a clause naming her legal guardian and mother of the child, one Matteo Russo, born that night. A sum of money that made her light-headed. A term, 3 years, renewable, and a provision for her eventual quiet exit with a new identity and enough money to disappear if she chose. 3 years, she said, until he's old enough that the danger changes shape, Vittorio said, until I've dealt with the men who would hurt him. Then you're free, with everything I promised. Maria looked at the pen Renata was holding out. Silver, heavy. It looked like it cost more than her car. She thought about the baby crying. She thought about her mother in Revere. She signed. The mansion sat on the north shore, behind gates and a stone wall and a stand of old oaks, with the Atlantic pounding at the rocks below its lawns. It was the kind of house that had a name, Belmar, carved into the gatepost, the kind of house that had watched 3 generations of Russos launder their sins into legitimacy. Maria moved in on a Tuesday with 2 suitcases and a heart full of dread. Her old life dissolved with unnerving efficiency. A letter of resignation appeared for her signature, personal reasons, and her practice partners were told a story about a family emergency and a move out of state. Her apartment was emptied and closed. Her mother received a call in Maria's own voice, explaining that Maria had met someone, that it had happened fast, that she was happy. Maria had made that call herself, hating every word, because the alternative Vittorio described, her mother's confusion, her mother's questions, her mother's danger, was worse. "You're very good at this," she told Renata, who turned out to be Vittorio's aunt, the family's fixer, the woman who made problems disappear. The lying. "I've had 40 years of practice, cara." Renata folded a cashmere throw over the foot of the enormous bed in Maria's new suite. "You'll get good at it too. It's a survival skill in this house." The suite adjoined Vittorio's. Of course it did. The marriage had to look real to the staff, some of whom were as much spies as servants. But there was a lock on the connecting door, and Vittorio had put the key in Maria's palm himself the first night, folding her fingers over it. "You lock it," he said, "from your side, always. I will never turn that handle. You have my word, and my word is the only thing in this world I have never broken." She had believed him. She wasn't sure why, but she had. The days took on a rhythm she hadn't expected. The baby, Matteo, became her whole gravity. She fed him, changed him, walked the endless marble halls with him against her shoulder at 3 in the morning when he wouldn't settle. She was a doctor, not a mother, and she'd thought she would feel like a fraud. Instead, she felt something crack open in her chest and never fully close again. He curled his impossibly tiny hand around her finger, and she was lost. Vittorio watched them, always from a distance at first, from doorways, from the far end of rooms, a dark figure with unreadable eyes. He did not touch the baby for 8 days. Maria noticed. She noticed everything about him because he was the most dangerous thing in her orbit, and danger demands attention. On the 9th day, she found him in the nursery at dawn, standing over the crib, and Matteo's tiny hand was wrapped around Vittorio's enormous finger, and the man who ran half the crime in Boston was crying without a sound, tears sliding down that carved face, while he stood perfectly still, as though weeping were a thing that could be done covertly if one held still enough.
Maria stepped back before he saw her. Some griefs are not meant to be witnessed. But she carried the image with her, and it changed something. It made him a man. He came to her that evening, in the small library where she'd taken to reading when the baby slept. He set a glass of wine beside her without asking, and took the chair opposite, and for a while they simply sat, two strangers, married on paper, listening to the ocean.
"Tell me about her," Maria said finally. Sophia. His jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because I delivered her son, and I watched her die, and I don't even know who she was. Because he's going to ask, someday, about his mother, and I want to be able to tell him something true." Vittorio was quiet for a long time. She was 24. She loved old films, the black and white ones, with the women in the beautiful clothes. She was funny, sharp. She used to catch me lying and call me on it, which no one else in my life has ever dared to do. A pause. Except you, apparently. "How did you meet?" She sang, in a club I owned downtown, the Velvet Room. Something crossed his face, quick and dark. She had a voice that made grown men weep into their drinks. I heard her sing "Non, je ne regrette rien," and I did not leave that table for 4 hours. "That's romantic," Maria said, "for a mobster." "I am capable of romance, Dr. Bianchi." His eyes found hers, and the temperature in the room changed. "I am only rarely permitted it." She looked away first. Her heart was doing something complicated, and she did not approve of it. "You loved her." "I don't know," he said, and the honesty of it startled her. "I wanted to. She deserved to be loved. But love, in my world, is a liability, a door left open. I kept a part of myself closed to her, and she knew it, and I think it hurt her. And now she's dead, and I can't unclose it." He drained his wine. "So no, I don't think I loved her the way she wanted. But I would have burned this city to keep her alive." "Make of that what you will." Maria turned the wine glass in her hands and did not answer. Because the truth was, she didn't know what to make of any of it, of him, of this house, of the small, warm weight sleeping down the hall who had rearranged her entire soul. "Get some sleep, Doctor," Vittorio said, rising. At the door he paused. "Maria." It was the first time he'd used her name. "Thank you," he said. "For his life. I have not said it properly. I'm saying it now." Then he was gone, and Maria sat alone with the ocean and her traitorous heart, and told herself very firmly that she was going to survive 3 years in this house without doing anything as stupid as feeling something. She would fail. She already knew she would fail. It began with a fever. Matteo spiked a temperature at 6 weeks. Nothing catastrophic, the ordinary crucible of infancy, but Maria, being who she was, wanted his full birth data to rule things out. The problem was that there was no full birth data, no hospital chart. There was only what Maria herself had scrawled in her notebook that night, and she remembered whatever Sophia's own care had generated during the pregnancy. "Sophia saw a doctor," Maria said to Renata over breakfast. "She had to. That kind of pregnancy, the abruption, there would have been warning signs, prenatal records, blood work. Where did she get her care?" Renata's cup paused a fraction of a second on its way to her lips. "A private physician, Dr. Alaric. He handled sensitive matters for the family." I need her records. For Matteo's history. Genetic risk factors, blood type, anything. Renata's face was smooth and lovely and told her nothing. I'll ask Vittorio. But Maria did not wait for Vittorio. This was her one remaining piece of professional certainty in a world that had taken everything else, and she reached for it like a drowning woman reaches for wood. She found Dr. Alaric's name in a directory, called his office pretending to be a physician requesting transfer of records for a patient now in her care, which technically was true. And 3 days later, a sealed envelope arrived at Belmar, addressed to Dr. Maria Bianchi. She read it that night in the library, and the wine went sour in her mouth. Sophia Kame's prenatal records were meticulous. Alaric had been thorough. And what they showed made no sense at first, and then made a terrible kind of sense. Sophia had been sick for months, progressive, fatigue, nausea beyond the ordinary, episodes of confusion, tingling in the hands and feet, hair loss noted at 2 visits. Her blood work showed a slow, creeping anemia that no supplement corrected. Elevated liver enzymes, a pattern of symptoms that, taken one at a time, could all be waved away as the discomforts of a difficult pregnancy. But Maria was not reading them one at a time. She was reading them all together, in sequence, the way a story is read, and it told the story of poison. She sat very still. Heavy metals, that was the shape of it. Thallium, maybe, or arsenic, the classic ones. The ones that mimicked illness, that built up slowly, that a distracted or complicit doctor might miss or choose to miss. The abruption that had killed Sophia could easily have been the endgame of chronic toxicity. A body so poisoned that its systems failed at the moment of greatest stress. Sophia had not died of a tragic obstetric accident. Someone had been killing her for months. Slowly, patiently. Someone with access to her food, her home, her body. Someone inside these very walls. Maria's first instinct, the good citizen's instinct, the doctor's instinct, was to call the police. Her second, colder thought stopped her hand halfway to a phone she no longer had. There are no police in this world. There is only Vittorio. And Vittorio had said, that first dawn, no one could have saved his mother. Said it with that flat, strange certainty. Had he known? Had he done it? A mistress becomes inconvenient. It was an old story, older than the Mafia itself. Maybe Sophia had learned something. Maybe she had threatened to leave, to talk, to run with his child. Maria didn't want to believe it. That was the first sign of how far gone she already was, that her heart argued against the evidence, that some part of her had already decided this man could not be the kind of monster who poisons the mother of his own son. But she was a scientist. She did not get to choose her conclusions. She heard the library door open. Vittorio stood there in shirt-sleeves, and he saw the papers in her lap, and he went still in that way he had. "Those are Sophia's," he said quietly. "How did you get those?" "I'm a doctor. Getting medical records is what I do." Maria's voice was steadier than her hands. "Vittorio, sit down. I need to ask you something, and I need you to look at me when you answer it, because I have gotten very good at watching men's faces, and I will know if you lie." He sat, slowly. His eyes never left hers. "Sophia wasn't sick," Maria said. "She was poisoned, slowly, over months. Heavy metals, almost certainly. It's all here, the anemia, the neuropathy, the confusion, the hair loss. This isn't a difficult pregnancy. This is a murder that took its time." She leaned forward. "Did you know?"
Something happened in his face that she would remember for a long time. Not guilt, not the flinch of a man caught. It was worse. It was a kind of horror, a dawning, the look of a man watching the floor of his own house drop away beneath him. "No," he breathed. "No, I—" He took the papers from her hands, and she watched his eyes move over the numbers, and she watched him understand, and she watched him become, in the space of 30 seconds, more frightening than she had ever seen him. She was so tired, all the time. I thought it was the pregnancy. Aloik said it was the pregnancy. Aloik! The name came out like a blade being drawn. Vittorio. Someone did this in my house. He stood, and the calm on him now was the worst kind, the flat, glassy calm of the sea before it kills you. Someone poisoned the mother of my son under my own roof, and I did not see it. I looked at her every day, and I did not see it. "Then you didn't do it," Maria said, and heard the relief in her own voice, and hated herself for it. He looked at her, and understood what the relief meant, and something passed between them that neither of them was ready to name. "You thought I did," he said. "I didn't know you," she said. "I still don't." "Yes, you do." He said it softly, and it was true, and it was the most dangerous thing either of them had said yet. Then the softness was gone. Someone in this family is going to answer for this. I will find them, and when I do— He stopped himself. "Go to bed, Maria. Lock your door. Not from me, from whoever is still in this house." She did not sleep that night. Neither, she suspected, did he. He took her out 3 weeks later, and Maria understood it was not a date so much as a performance. The new Mrs. Russo presented to the world. The Velvet Room occupied the top 2 floors of a building downtown, all red velvet and black glass and gold light, the kind of place where the city's money went to touch the city's crime, and both pretended they were only there for the music. A jazz trio played low on a small stage, waiters moved like dancers, and when Vittorio Russo walked in with a woman on his arm, the whole room reoriented itself around him, the way iron filings turn to a magnet. Maria wore a dress Renata had chosen, deep emerald silk, cut to make her look like she belonged in a place she did not belong. Vittorio's hand rested at the small of her back, warm through the silk, guiding her, and she was intensely, uncomfortably aware of it. "Smile," he murmured against her ear. "You're supposed to be happy. You married the most feared man in Boston, and you're carrying his money in your bank account. I'm carrying his dead lover's baby, and a secret that could get me killed. Forgive me if my smile needs work." His mouth twitched. Fair. They were seated at the best table, elevated, with a view of the whole room. Champagne appeared, and then, one by one, the men came. Capos and associates, and businessmen with soft hands and hard eyes, all of them wanting to be seen paying respects to the boss and his new bride. Vittorio introduced her smoothly, his hand never leaving her, his voice never warming. Maria smiled and lied and watched them all, and catalogued the ones whose eyes lingered too long, the ones whose congratulations had a sour note underneath. And then a woman crossed the room, and Maria felt Vittorio's whole body change. She was beautiful in the way of blades, dark-haired, sharp-featured, expensively dressed in blood red, a cigarette burning in one ringed hand, though the club was smoke-free for everyone else.
She moved like she owned the place, and Maria realized she probably half did. "Vittorio," the woman said, and kissed his cheek, and turned appraising eyes on Maria. "So this is the doctor, the little miracle who appeared from nowhere and married my brother in secret." A slow, cool smile. "I'm Isabella, Vittorio's sister. Someone in this family should welcome you properly, since he clearly won't." "Bella," Vittorio said, and there was warning in it. "What? I'm being kind." Isabella sat without being invited, folding herself into the chair with feline grace. "You have no idea, Doctor, what it's like to learn your brother has married from a phone call. No wedding, no introduction to the family, just poof, a wife. And a nephew, I'm told. A son." She exhaled smoke. "How did you manage it so fast, I wonder? A whirlwind." "Some things move quickly when they're meant to," Maria said, keeping her voice light. Isabella's eyes glittered. "And how is the baby? Matteo. Sweet name. Healthy? Growing?" "Very healthy," Maria said. "How wonderful." Isabella's smile did not reach her eyes, and something in the back of Maria's mind stirred. A cold, small movement, like a cellar door creaking open. A new air. Everything changes now, doesn't it, Vittorio? All the plans, all the arrangements. She stubbed out her cigarette. "Well, I'm sure we'll all adjust." She kissed her brother's cheek again and rose. At Maria's ear, low so only she could hear, Isabella said, "Take good care of him, Doctor. Babies are so terribly fragile. Anything can happen." Then she was gone, a red flame moving through the golden room, and Maria sat very still, with her champagne untouched and her heart pounding. Anything can happen. "Your sister," Maria said carefully, "does not like me." "My sister does not like anyone she cannot use." Vittorio's eyes tracked Isabella across the room. "Don't take it personally." But Maria was taking it very personally, because a phrase was circling in her head. Everything changes now, all the arrangements. And she was a doctor who had just discovered a poisoning, and she did not believe in coincidence. "Vittorio," she said, "before Matteo, before Sophia, who was your heir? Who inherited all of this if you had no children?" He went still, turned to her slowly. "Why do you ask that? Answer the question, please." A muscle worked in his jaw. "There is no formal, there's always an heir. In families like yours, there's always a line of succession, because power hates a vacuum. If you'd died last year with no child, who would have taken your place?" The jazz trio slid into something slow and mournful. Vittorio looked at his sister across the room, laughing now with a table of hard-eyed men, red dress like a wound in the gold light. "My father named no successor before he died," Vittorio said slowly. "The family assumed it would be me, but if I had died without an heir—" He stopped. "It would have been her," Maria finished. "Isabella, wouldn't it?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was the loudest thing in the room. And Maria, watching the beautiful woman in red who had just whispered a threat against a 6-week-old baby, felt the pieces of something monstrous begin, very quietly, to slide into place. She did not say the word poison aloud. Not there, not in that room full of ears. But she reached across the table
and put her hand over Vittorio's, the first time she had touched him willingly. And when he looked at her, startled, she held his gaze and said low, "We need to talk. At home, not here. There are things I've started to understand." His hand turned over beneath hers and gripped it hard, and for one dangerous moment neither of them was performing anything at all.
"Home, then," he said. They did not talk that night. Matteo had a bad night, colic or something like it, and Maria spent the small hours walking him through the dark house, while Vittorio, unable to sleep, walked beside her. And somewhere between 2 and 4 in the morning, the conversation they'd meant to have about poison and sisters and succession dissolved into something quieter and more dangerous. "Give him to me," Vittorio said in the blue dark of the nursery. Maria hesitated. He held out his arms, those enormous arms that had, she had no doubt, done terrible things. And she laid his son into them, and Vittorio Russo, who frightened grown men into silence, began to sway on the spot, murmuring in Italian, and Matteo's crying eased into hitching breaths, and then into sleep.
"You're good at that," Maria whispered. "I had a lot of siblings growing up." A shadow crossed his face. "There were 6 of us once. There are 2 now. What happened to the others?" "This life happened to them." He looked down at his son. "I swore I'd never bring a child into it, and here he is." They stood close in the dark, the sleeping baby between them, and Maria was suddenly painfully aware of the heat of him, the clean scent of him, the fact that if she leaned forward 6 inches, her forehead would rest against his chest. She did not lean forward. She was proud of herself for not leaning forward, but she wanted to, and the wanting was a betrayal of Sophia, of her own good sense, of every principle she'd ever held about what kind of man was worth wanting. "You should sleep," Vittorio said, but he didn't move. "So should you." "I don't sleep much." He laid Matteo in the crib with a tenderness that undid her. Then he straightened and turned, and they were very close in the dark, and his eyes moved over her face the way a starving man looks at a meal he's forbidden. "Maria." "Don't," she said softly. "Whatever you're about to say, don't." "You don't know what I was going to say." "I know it's going to make this harder, and it's already impossible." He studied her for a long moment. "I was going to say that you should lock your door tonight, because Bella is in the house. She came back with us. She's staying in the East Wing, and until I understand what's happening, I don't want you or my son unguarded." A pause. "That's what I was going to say. What did you think I was going to say?" Heat crawled up Maria's neck. "Nothing. Never mind." "Maria." His voice dropped, rough. "If you thought I was going to say that I lie awake in the next room, aware of every sound you make through the wall, that I have to remind myself every single night that you signed a contract and not a marriage, that I have never in my life wanted anything the way I have taught myself not to want you." He stopped himself, jaw tight. "If you thought I was going to say that, then you were right. But I wasn't going to say it, because you're correct. It makes everything harder, and I don't have the right." Maria's heart was slamming against her ribs. "No," she managed. "You don't." "I know."
Sophia isn't even cold.
I know that too. His voice was raw. I'm not proud of it. I feel it anyway. I've spent my whole life controlling everything around me, and I cannot control this, and it is— He exhaled. Go to bed, Doctor. Lock the door, from your side. She went. She locked it. She lay in the enormous bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the ocean and, faintly through the wall, to the sound of a man not sleeping, and she pressed her hand over her own mouth so she wouldn't make a single sound he could hear. In the morning she found a note slid under the connecting door in a hard, elegant hand. I meant what I said, all of it, both parts. V. She burned it in the library fireplace and told herself she felt nothing. But that day something shifted in the house, some invisible barometer. They orbited each other more carefully now, and more closely. A hand that lingered when passing the baby, a gaze held a beat too long across the dinner table, the electric awareness of two bodies in the same room. Renata noticed. Renata noticed everything. She said nothing, but her eyes went thoughtful, and once, watching Maria watch Vittorio in the garden, she murmured, "Be careful, cara. Loving him is not the dangerous part. Loving him is easy. Surviving it, that's the trick." "I'm not—" Maria started. "Don't." Renata's smile was kind and terribly sad. "I've buried 2 women who loved men in this family. I'd rather not bury a third. Just go in with your eyes open. That's all I ask. Whatever else you feel, keep your eyes open." Maria kept her eyes open, which is why, 3 days later, she saw Isabella in the nursery. She wasn't supposed to be there. Matteo was napping, the monitor on, and Maria had come up to check on him and found the door ajar, and Isabella standing over the crib, one long red-nailed finger stroking the baby's cheek, an expression on her beautiful face that Maria would see in her nightmares. Not hatred, which she could have understood, but a cold, assessing emptiness, the look of a person calculating the weight of an obstacle. "He looks like Vittorio," Isabella said without turning. "Poor thing. The Russo curse. We're all born looking like we belong to something that will eventually destroy us." She looked up, and the emptiness snapped into a bright, social smile. "Doctor, I didn't hear you. I was just admiring my nephew." "He needs his rest," Maria said, crossing to the crib, putting her body between Isabella and the baby without quite seeming to. "New babies, you know." "Of course." Isabella drifted toward the door. She paused there and looked back, and for 1 second the mask slipped entirely, and Maria saw the truth of her, and her blood ran cold. "You know," Isabella said pleasantly, "I looked into you, Dr. Bianchi. Your practice, your patience, your poor mother in Revere." A smile. "You're not stupid, I can tell. So I'll give you some free advice, sister to sister. Some families are like the ocean. You can visit, you can even swim, but you should never, ever forget that it can pull you under whenever it likes. Sleep well." Then she was gone, and Maria stood over the sleeping baby with her heart in her throat and understood that the war had already begun, and that she was standing squarely in the middle of it. The letter came from a lawyer, which was somehow more frightening than if it had come with a gun. It arrived on a grey morning, hand-delivered by a courier who required Vittorio's own signature, and Maria watched from the top of the stairs as Vittorio read it in the front hall, and she watched the colour leave his face. And she came down the stairs slowly, because whatever it was very bad. "What is it?" He handed it to her without a word. It was written in the cold, dead language of the law, but the meaning underneath was molten.
The Moretti family, Vittorio's oldest rivals, the family whose feud with the Russos went back 3 generations, was formally asserting a claim, not to territory, not to money, to Matteo. The letter alleged that Sophia Kane had not been what Vittorio believed, that she had been, in truth, a Moretti operative, a woman planted in the Russo organization years ago, sent to seduce and inform, and, when the moment came, to bear a child who would give the Morettis a claim on the Russo bloodline and the Russo Empire. The letter alleged that the child Matteo was in fact fathered not by Vittorio, but by Antonio Moretti, the rival Don's son, and that Sophia had passed the child off as Vittorio's as the final move in a long game. The letter demanded a paternity test, and it demanded custody. Maria's hands shook as she read it. "This is insane. They can't just claim a baby." "They can claim anything they want," Vittorio said, in a voice she'd never heard from him, hollow, scraped, raw. "The question is what they can prove, and what they'll do while they try." "Is it possible?" Maria made herself ask it. "Is any of it possible? Was Sophia—" "No." But he said it too fast, and then he was silent, and Maria watched doubt move across his face like a shadow crossing water. Sophia never spoke of the Morettis. She had no reason to. She came to me through the club. Her family was from, she said, Providence. She said her people were nobody." He stopped. "I never checked. Why would I check? She was a singer. She was warm and funny, and she loved old films." His hand closed into a fist. "And she was poisoned in my house by someone who knew exactly how to make it look like nothing. Which means someone planned this, all of it, for a long time." The word hung between them, planned. "If Sophia was a Moretti plant," Maria said slowly, working it through, "then the Morettis had every reason to want that baby born, and Vittorio to believe it was his. So why poison her? Why kill your own operative before she can complete the mission?" Vittorio looked at her, and she watched him arrive where she'd already arrived. Unless the person who poisoned her wasn't working for the Moretti's plan. Unless the poison and the claim are 2 different weapons, pointed by 2 different hands. Or— He stopped. "Or the same hand," Maria said, very quietly, "wielding both. Someone who wanted the baby to exist long enough to become a weapon in a custody war, a war that would tear the Russo family apart from the inside, and then wanted the mother dead so she couldn't tell the truth about any of it." The nursery monitor crackled softly. Somewhere upstairs, Matteo made a small waking sound. "Isabella," Maria said, "you don't know that. I know she loses everything the moment that baby exists. I know she threatened him in his own nursery. I know she said all the arrangements change now." Maria stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Vittorio, listen to me. Think like the doctor for a second, not the brother. If your sister was passed over, if that baby cost her the family, the power, everything, and she couldn't just murder an infant outright without the whole family turning on her, What's the most elegant thing she could do? She could make the child radioactive, make him a Moretti, make his very blood a threat to the family instead of its future. Then she doesn't have to kill him. The war kills him, and no one ever looks at her. Vittorio was very still. That's a monstrous accusation. It's a monstrous situation, and I've watched her look at your son. Maria's voice broke slightly. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying we test it. All of it. The paternity, the poison, everything. Because if I'm wrong, I'll be relieved. And if I'm right, that baby upstairs is in more danger than either of us has admitted. For a long moment, Vittorio said nothing. Then he crossed to her and did something he'd never done. He took her face in both his hands, gently, and looked at her as though she were the only fixed point in a collapsing world. You, he said roughly, are the most dangerous woman I have ever met. Do you know that? You walked into my house to save a life, and you've spent every day since pulling my whole world apart to find the truth in it. You should have run. You should still run. Instead, you're standing here plotting to catch a killer inside my own family. Someone has to, Maria said, and her voice was not steady. And you're too close to see her. And I'm the only one in this house who isn't afraid of her. You should be afraid of her. I am. Maria's eyes stung. I'm afraid of all of it. Of her, of the Morettis, of this house, of you. She swallowed. Of what I feel when you look at me like this. His thumb moved against her cheekbone once. His eyes dropped to her mouth. The whole world narrowed to the 6 inches between them and the pounding of the Atlantic outside. And then, very deliberately, he let her go and stepped back, and the loss of his hands was a physical ache. We do the paternity test, he said, his voice rough. We do it privately first, before the Morettis force a court test on their terms. And we watch Bella, carefully, without letting her know she's watched. He turned to go make the calls that would set it all in motion. At the door he paused. Maria, if you're right about her, if my own sister did this, I need you to understand what that will require of me before it happens, so you're not surprised by the kind of man I have to be. I know what you are, Maria said quietly. No, he said. You know what I've done for money and territory. You don't yet know what I'll do for you and my son. And he left, and Maria stood alone in the front hall with the terrible letter in her hands and understood that everything was about to get so much worse. Vittorio arranged the private test through a physician he trusted, or trusted as much as he trusted anyone, which is to say, a man whose family lived somewhere Vittorio could reach. A cheek swab from Matteo, a vial of Vittorio's blood, couriered to a lab 3 states away under a false name. Results in 10 days. 10 days is a very long time to wait to learn whether the child you love belongs to the man you're falling for. Maria filled the days with vigilance. She trusted no food she hadn't watched prepared. She kept Matteo with her almost constantly and slept with the monitor turned up and a chair wedged under the connecting door handle, not to keep Vittorio out, but to keep everyone else out. She catalogued Isabella's movements the way she'd once catalogued patients' vitals, when she came and went, whom she met,
the phone she kept that wasn't her usual phone, the calls she took in the garden where the house couldn't hear. On the fourth day, Maria followed her. It was reckless. She knew it was reckless. But Isabella took the second phone into the garden at dusk, walking down toward the sea wall, and Maria slipped out through the kitchen and moved along the hedge line, and she got close enough to hear fragments carried on the wind. As we discussed, the lawyers have filed Isabella's voice, low and hard.
No, he won't test on your terms. He's not stupid. He'll test privately first, which is fine. It doesn't matter what the blood says, Antonio. Don't you understand? It matters what everyone believes. And by the time... The wind swallowed the rest. Then, the doctor is a problem. She's clever. She's seen too much. She's been in Sophia's records. A pause. No, not yet. But if she becomes... Another gust. Handle it the way we handled the singer. Maria's blood turned to ice. The way we handled the singer. She had it. She had it in Isabella's own voice, the collusion with Antonio Moretti, the confession that the poison and the claim were one plot, the confirmation that Sophia had been murdered and that Maria herself was next on the list. She had it, and she had no way to prove it, because she had no recording, no witness, nothing but her own word against a woman the whole family loved and feared. She backed away through the hedge, heart hammering, and made it to the kitchen, and made it up the stairs, and it was only when she reached the nursery and gathered Matteo into her arms that her hands finally started to shake so hard she had to sit down. She told Vittorio that night. Every room in the house felt like it was listening now. She found Vittorio in his study, and she closed the door. And she told him everything. The second phone, the garden, Antonio Moretti's name, the fragments she'd caught on the wind. She told him the way we handled the singer and watched the words land on him like blows. He did not explode. That was the thing about Vittorio Russo. The more dangerous his feeling, the quieter he became. He sat behind his father's old desk, and his face went still and glassy, and only his hands moved, slowly folding a single sheet of paper into smaller and smaller squares, until it could fold no more. "You followed her," he said finally, "alone, into the garden, where no one could see or help you. Vittorio, she said you were a problem. She said you'd seen too much. And your response was to walk within 20 feet of her and give her a reason to move faster." His voice was low and shaking, with something that was not quite anger. "Do you have any idea what she would do to you? Do you understand that I found out my son's mother was poisoned to death under my own roof, and my sister was smiling at me across the dinner table the whole time?" "And you followed her into the dark?" "I did it because you can't see her," Maria shot back, "because she's your sister, and you love her, and love makes you slow. I'm the only one who can look at her clearly because I don't love her. I never did. And someone in this house has to be able to see the truth without it breaking their heart." He was around the desk before she finished, and then his hands were on her shoulders, and then she never afterward decided who moved first, and it didn't matter. His mouth was on hers. It was not gentle. It was months of restraint breaking at once, and Maria's hands fisted in his shirt and pulled him closer instead of pushing him away, and he made a sound against her mouth like a man in pain, and the whole careful architecture of contracts and locked doors and "I don't have the right" came down in a single, silent avalanche.
When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard.
"This is a catastrophe," Maria whispered. "Yes," Vittorio agreed, his forehead against hers. "Sophia. Sophia is dead, and I grieve her, and I will avenge her. And none of that changes that I have wanted you since you told me to get out of my own bedroom while you saved my son's life." His hands framed her face. "I have never wanted anything the way I want you. It frightens me. Do you understand? I am not a man who is permitted to want things this much. It's how they get to you. It's the open door." "Then close it," Maria said, and didn't mean it, and he heard that she didn't mean it. "I can't," he said. "That's the problem. I've tried. I can't." She should have stepped back. She was a doctor, a rational woman, standing in the study of a Mafia don who had just confirmed his sister was a murderer and his rivals wanted to steal a baby. And every rational cell in her body was screaming that this man was the centre of a storm that would kill her. She kissed him again anyway. Later, much later, both of them still fully dressed, having stopped at a line neither was willing to cross, while Sophia's death was this fresh and the danger this high. They lay tangled on the leather couch in his study, and Maria traced the old scars on his forearm with one finger. "Tell me it'll be over soon," she said. "Tell me the test comes back, and it's yours, and Isabella gets what she deserves, and we get to just be people." Vittorio was quiet a long moment. "I can't tell you that. But I can tell you this. If that child is mine, and in my heart I know he's mine, I knew it the moment I heard him cry, then no one takes him. Not the Morettis, not my sister, not God himself. And if anyone tries to take you—" His arm tightened around her. "I have done terrible things for terrible reasons, Maria. Money, territory, pride. For the first time in my life, I have something worth doing terrible things for a good reason. Don't ask me to be gentle about protecting the only two people I've ever—" He stopped. "Ever what?" Maria whispered. "You know what." She did. She pressed her face into his chest so he wouldn't see hers, and outside the ocean threw itself at the rocks, patient and endless, the way it had for 1,000 years and would for 1,000 more, indifferent to the small, desperate warmth of two people who had found each other at the worst possible time, in the worst possible place. Neither of them heard the study door, 3 inches ajar where the latch hadn't caught. Neither of them saw the sliver of red silk pass in the hall, or the dark eye that watched for 3 long seconds before withdrawing, silent as smoke. But upstairs, in the east wing, Isabella Russo poured herself a glass of wine with a perfectly steady hand and smiled at nothing at all, because she had just learned the most useful thing she'd learned all week. Her brother was in love. And love, as everyone in this family knew, was the open door. The test would take 10 days. On the 6th, everything changed. Maria had begun to allow herself something dangerous, hope. Not that the danger would pass, she was not naive, but that she and Vittorio and the baby might form some small, fortified island in the middle of it. In the mornings now, Vittorio lingered over coffee instead of vanishing into the machinery of his empire. He held Matteo differently, with a confidence that had grown day by day. Once Maria caught him singing to the baby, low and off-key, the French song Sophia used to sing, and she had to leave the room before he saw her cry. Renata saw all of it. On the 6th morning, she cornered Maria in the conservatory among the orange trees. "You've done a stupid thing," Renata said, without preamble. "I don't know what you— Cara, I have watched men fall in love in this family for 40 years. I know the walk. He walks like a man who has stopped being careful." Renata's lined face was grave. "That is beautiful, and it will get one of you killed. And I need you to hear me. Isabella is not what she pretends." I have known it longer than Vittorio. I said nothing because I had no proof, and because she is my niece, and because I am a coward. But I've watched her these last weeks. She's happy. Do you understand how wrong that is? Sophia is dead. The family is at war with the Morettis, and Isabella is happy. People are only that happy when things are going exactly according to a plan they made. "I know," Maria said quietly. "I heard her, in the garden, talking to Antonio Moretti." Renata went pale. "You have proof?" "I have my own 2 ears, and no way to make anyone believe them." Maria took the old woman's hands. "Renata, you've been in this family your whole life. You know how it works. If Vittorio moves against his sister with no proof, what happens?" "Civil war," Renata said flatly. "Half the men are loyal to him, but Isabella has spent years being generous to the other half. Favours, money, marriages arranged, debts forgiven. She's built a following in the shadows while everyone watched Vittorio. If he accuses her without proof, the family splits, and a split family is a dead family. The Morettis would carve us up in a month." She squeezed Maria's hands, which is exactly what she wants. Don't you see? She doesn't need to win a war against her brother. She only needs to start one. Then the Morettis do her killing for her, and she picks up whatever's left. The pieces kept fitting, each one uglier than the last. Maria felt sick. "So we need proof, real proof, before the test comes back and forces everyone's hand." "You need," Renata said, "to be very, very careful, because you are the loose thread now. Sophia is dead. Alaric, the doctor who covered the poisoning, I made some calls. He left the country 3 weeks ago, retired, which in this family means either bought or buried." She held Maria's gaze. "You are the only person left alive who has read those records and understood them. You are the only witness to what happened in the garden. If I were Isabella, Cara, I would already be planning how to make you disappear." That night the house's power went out. It happened at 2:14 a.m. Maria saw the bedside clock die. She was awake. She was always half awake now. The dark was total, the ocean loud in the sudden silence of dead electronics. And then she heard it, the connecting door handle turning. Her heart stopped. He gave me his word he'd never turn that handle, which meant it wasn't him. Maria was out of bed and across the room before she'd finished the thought, snatching the heavy brass lamp off the dresser, positioning herself against the wall beside the door. The handle turned again, locked from her side, thank God. And then there was a soft scraping at the lock, the sound of a pick. and Maria's blood roared in her ears. She did not scream. Screaming would only tell them where she was. Instead, she moved silently to the nursery door. Matteo slept in the adjoining room now, at her insistence, and slipped through and lifted the sleeping baby from his crib, and pressed herself and him into the deep shadow behind the heavy curtains, brass lamp raised, and waited. The connecting door opened. A figure moved into her bedroom, dark on dark, a shape she couldn't read. It went to the bed. She heard the soft sound of a hand testing empty sheets. She heard a low, frustrated exhalation, feminine. Then the beam of a small flashlight swept the room and found the empty bed and began, methodically, to search. Matteo stirred against Maria's chest. She pressed her lips to his downy head and prayed. The light swept closer, closer. The edge of the curtain. Maria's arm ached from holding the lamp. She could see now the gloved hand holding the flashlight, the sleeve of a dark jacket, and she made a decision that if that light found them, she would swing first and scream after, that she would fight for this child with everything she had. The house's power surged back on. Every light blazed. The intruder froze, caught in the sudden brightness, half turned toward the curtains, and for one frozen half-second, Maria saw a slice of face beneath a dark cap. Not Isabella. A man, a stranger, a professional. And then footsteps were pounding down the hall, Vittorio's voice roaring her name, and the intruder bolted for the connecting door. Vittorio hit the doorway like a freight train. The two men collided. There was a brutal, ugly scramble. No cinematic grace to it, just grunting and the wet sound of fists. And then the intruder wrenched free, dove through the connecting door, and was gone into the dark of the other suite. Vittorio started after him. "Vittorio!" Maria's voice cracked. "He was looking for me. For us. Don't leave." He stopped, turned. Saw her behind the curtain, the baby against her chest, the brass lamp still raised in her white-knuckled hand. And the look on his face, she would never forget it, was not fear for himself, had never once in the whole encounter been fear for himself. It was the pure animal terror of a man who had almost lost the only things he loved. He crossed the room and pulled them both into his arms, baby and all, and held them so tight it hurt, and Maria felt him shaking. "I've got you," he said into her hair, over and over. "I've got you. I've got you." Down the hall, they heard the far door of the east wing open and close. Isabella's voice, sleepy and innocent. "What on earth is all this noise?" Over Maria's head, Vittorio's eyes went to the hallway, and they were no longer shaking at all. They were the flat, cold, patient eyes of the sea before it kills you. The results came on the 10th day. They came the way everything came to that house, quietly, in a sealed envelope, hand-delivered by a man Vittorio trusted, into a room that had been swept twice for listening devices. Vittorio, Maria, and Renata. No one else. Certainly not Isabella, who had been told, coolly, that her presence was not required, and who had smiled her cool smile and said, "Of course, family business," in a way that made Maria's skin crawl. The envelope sat on the desk between them for a full minute before anyone touched it. "Whatever it says," Maria said quietly, "it doesn't change what he is to us, to you. You know that." "I know," Vittorio said, But his hands, when he finally picked up the envelope, were not entirely steady. He opened it. He read it. And Maria watched a decade fall off his face. "He's mine," Vittorio said. His voice broke on it. 99.99%. He's my son. He was always my son. Sophia never... She wasn't. He put the paper down and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes, and Maria realized that some part of him, some quiet, tormented part, had believed the Moretti lie, had spent 10 days wondering if the child he'd fallen in love with belonged to his enemy, had loved him anyway, and now had permission to love him without the poison of doubt. Maria came around the desk and wrapped her arms around him from behind, and he gripped her forearm where it crossed his chest, and Renata quietly wept into a handkerchief in her chair. And for a moment, one single golden moment, it was over. Matteo was his. The Moretti claim was a lie. The blood said so. Then Renata, ever the survivor, spoke the truth none of them wanted to hear. "It doesn't matter." They both looked at her. "The test doesn't matter," Renata repeated, wiping her eyes, her voice hardening into 40 years of hard-won clarity. "I told you, Cara. It was never about what the blood says. It's about what people believe, and about what the war does before the truth can stop it. The Morettis filed a claim in a court. They'll demand their own test on their own terms with their own lab, and they'll say ours is forged, which, given what this family has forged over the years, is not an unreasonable thing to say. And in the meantime..." A phone rang, Vittorio's private line. He answered it, and Maria watched his face change, watched a golden moment shatter, watched a cold sea rise in him again. He set the phone down very slowly. "That was Salvatore," he said, "at the front gate. The Morettis have petitioned the court for an emergency order. They're claiming I'm a flight risk with the child, that I'll flee the country to avoid the custody question. They've asked the court to place Matteo in neutral custody pending the legal test." His jaw was iron. "A judge signed it an hour ago. They're sending people to take my son today." The room went cold. "They can't," Maria breathed. "He's an infant. You can't just..." "You can do anything with enough money and the right judge," Vittorio said. "Isabella taught me that years ago. She has friends in the courthouse. She always has." He was moving now, pulling a phone from a drawer, another from the wall safe, becoming in real time the man Maria had first seen, the boss, the general, the killer under the grief. "Renata, get the doctor and the baby to the boat, now, the one at the private dock. Salvatore knows. Go north, up the coast, to the house in Gloucester. I'll deal with the men at the gate and follow." "Vittorio!" Maria grabbed his arm. He caught her face in his hand, hard and fast, and kissed her once, fierce. "I will not let anyone take him. Or you. Do you understand? Go with Renata. Trust her with your life. I'll come for you both by nightfall." His eyes burned into hers. "Say it. Say you'll go." "I'll go," Maria said. "Come back to us. Swear it." "I swear it." And then he was gone, moving toward the front of the house and the enemies at the gate. And Renata had Maria by the elbow, pulling her toward the back stairs, toward the dock, toward the boat. They never made it to the boat, because the Morettis, or, Maria would understand much later, the woman who had been orchestrating the Morettis all along, had not put all their people at the front gate. Half of them, the real half, had come by water, up the same private dock Renata was running toward, and as Maria and Renata burst out onto the sea lawn with Matteo bundled against Maria's chest, 3 men in dark clothes were already coming up from the rocks, guns low and professional, moving to intercept. Renata shoved Maria behind her with surprising strength.
"Run! Back to the house!" But there were more coming from the side, from the tree line, and Maria understood with sick clarity that they had been herded, that the whole thing, the boat, the safe escape, had been anticipated. A hand closed on her arm. Renata screamed and clawed, and a man struck her down, and the old woman crumpled onto the grass, and Maria was screaming Vittorio's name into the wind off the ocean as strong hands dragged her toward the water, toward a boat. The baby clutched to her chest, kicking and fighting and utterly, completely outmatched. The last thing she saw of Belmar was the great grey house against the sky and the single figure in red standing at an upstairs window, perfectly still, watching, one hand raised to the glass in something that might, from a distance, have looked like a farewell.
Then the boat's engine roared, and the coast fell away, and Maria Bianchi and the child of 2 bloodlines were carried out onto the cold Atlantic into the hands of their enemies. They kept her in a room without windows. It smelled of salt and diesel and old cigarettes, and Maria guessed it was somewhere on the water, a boathouse maybe, or the lower floor of some coastal property the Morettis owned. They had let her keep Matteo, which told her something important. They needed the baby alive and unharmed. A dead heir was worth nothing in a custody war. That single cold fact was the only thing standing between Maria and total despair, and she clung to it and used it. She catalogued everything the way she catalogued a patient. 2 guards outside the door, rotating. Meals brought 3 times a day by a silent young man who wouldn't meet her eyes. Formula and diapers provided. Someone had thought ahead. Someone had planned for a baby, which meant this had been arranged well before the emergency court order. She made note of it all and filed it away and kept her face calm, because panic was a luxury she could not afford with a child depending on her. On the 2nd day, Antonio Moretti came to see her. He was younger than she'd expected, early 30s, handsome in a soft, spoiled way, nothing like the carved danger of Vittorio. He wore an expensive suit and an expression of aggrieved reasonableness, as though he were the injured party in all of this. "Dr. Bianchi," he said, sitting across from her at the small table, folding his manicured hands. "I want to apologize for the dramatics. It wasn't my preference, but your husband is not a reasonable man, and unreasonable men require dramatic solutions." "You kidnapped a doctor and an infant off a lawn," Maria said. "Let's not pretend this is a negotiation." "But it is," Antonio smiled. "Here is the situation. There is a court test scheduled. Everyone is very excited about this test. But tests, doctor, you're a physician, you know this. Tests can be influenced. Samples can be swapped. Labs can be persuaded. Your husband has already run a private test, which no doubt came back exactly as he wanted it to, because he owns the lab." He leaned forward. "I'm going to have my own test run, here, now, with samples I collect myself, sent to a lab I trust.
and whatever it shows, that's what the court will hear.
Do you understand? The blood will say what I need it to say. Maria understood perfectly. It was exactly what Renata had said. It was never about the blood. Antonio didn't care whose child Matteo was. He was going to manufacture a Moretti heir, seize a claim on the Russo Empire, and use the child as a permanent lever against Vittorio for the rest of their lives. "And me?" she asked. "Where do I fit in your plan?" Something flickered in Antonio's soft face, and Maria, who had spent weeks learning to read the faces of dangerous people, caught it. Discomfort. He looked away. "Your insurance," he said. "For now." For now. And there it was again, the phrase that meant, until you're not. Someone had told Antonio Moretti that the doctor was a problem to be handled, the way the singer had been handled. Maria was certain of it. And she was equally certain that Antonio, for all his posturing, was not the one running this. He was a spoiled boy playing at being a don, and someone smarter and colder was pulling his strings. "Antonio," Maria said slowly, watching him, "who told you Sofia was your family's operative?" He blinked. "That's not... because I've read Sofia's medical records, all of them. She wasn't a spy, Antonio. She was a nightclub singer who fell in love with the wrong man. And she was poisoned, slowly, deliberately, over months, by someone inside the Russo family. Not by Vittorio, someone else." Maria kept her voice level, reasonable, doctor to frightened patient. "Who told you she was yours? Who came to you with this whole beautiful plan, the claim, the court, the emergency order?" "Because it's very sophisticated, Antonio. It's very well financed, and with respect, it doesn't feel like you." The colour rose in his cheeks. "You don't know anything about—" "I know you're being used," Maria said, "by someone who wants the Russos and the Morettis to destroy each other, someone who benefits when both families bleed. Ask yourself, when this war is over, when Vittorio and I are dead and you've won your little custody battle, who's left standing? Who's spent this whole time in the shadows, letting you take all the risk?" She leaned in. "Her name is Isabella. And she is going to let you hang for all of this, Antonio, the second you stop being useful, the way she let Sofia die." For a moment, one real moment, she saw doubt crack across his face. She saw a young man who had been flattered and manipulated and handed a plan too clever to be his own, beginning to wonder. Then the door opened, and one of the guards leaned in, and the moment shattered. "The samples are ready to collect," the guard said. "And, boss, there's a situation at the perimeter." Antonio stood, smoothing his suit, the doubt vanishing behind bluster. "Collect the samples, swab the baby, draw the doctor's blood too. We'll want to establish the maternal—" "Don't touch him," Maria said, on her feet, Matteo clutched to her chest. "You want a sample? You take it from me first, and you take it over my—" The far wall exploded. Not the door. The wall. A section of it blown inward in a roar of splinters and dust, and a concussion that knocked Maria off her feet, and she twisted as she fell to shield the baby, and through the ringing in her ears she heard gunfire, close and sustained, and men shouting, and Antonio screaming orders, and then one voice cutting through all of it, a voice she would have known in her grave, roaring a single word that was her name. Vittorio had come.
He came through the smoke like something out of the old stories, the kind Renata's generation told about the men who'd built this world with blood. Maria, crouched in the corner with Matteo screaming against her chest, saw him through the drifting dust. Vittorio Russo, in a dark coat, a gun in each hand, moving with a terrible economy through the chaos he'd created.
There was nothing romantic in it. It was ugly and fast and final. Two of Antonio's men went down before they'd fully turned toward the breach. A third got off a wild shot that punched into the wall inches from Maria's head, and Vittorio killed him for it without breaking stride. And Maria understood that she was watching a man do the thing he had warned her about. "You don't yet know what I'll do for you and my son." She was watching it now. "Maria!" His eyes found her in the corner, and for one instant the killer's mask cracked and pure human relief flooded through. "Are you hurt? Is he—" "We're okay!" she screamed over the noise. "We're okay! We're not hit!" Then Antonio Moretti grabbed her. He'd crawled to her under the cover of the smoke, and now he hauled her up by the hair, an arm across her throat, a small, ugly pistol pressed to her temple, and he used her body as a shield, and he screamed at Vittorio in a voice gone shrill with terror, "Drop them! Drop the guns, or I paint the wall with her, Russo. I swear to God." Everything stopped. The gunfire died. In the ringing silence, Maria could hear her own heartbeat and Matteo's crying, and the ocean somewhere beyond the shattered wall, and Antonio's ragged breathing at her ear. Vittorio stood 10 feet away, both guns raised, and slowly, he pointed them at the floor. "Let her go," Vittorio said. His voice was very soft, very calm. "Antonio, look at me. The men in this room are dead or running. You have nowhere to go. Let her go, and the boy, and you walk out of here alive. That's the last generous thing I will ever offer a Moretti. Take it." "Generous," Antonio spat. His arm tightened on Maria's throat and she gagged. "You blew a hole in my house and killed my men, and you want to talk about generous? This was never a fair fight, Russo. Your family's always had the numbers, the money, the—" His voice cracked. "You take everything. You've always taken everything. Even her. She was ours, Russo. Sophia was—" "Sophia was a singer," Maria choked out, "and you know it. Someone lied to you." "Shut up!" The gun ground harder against her temple, and in the corner of her vision, Maria saw movement, low, behind Antonio. A shape rising from the smoke and rubble by the blown wall, battered, bleeding from a cut above one eye, but upright and holding a length of rebar in both weathered hands. Renata. She had come with Vittorio. Of course she had. The old woman had a bruise the size of a fist on her jaw from where the man on the lawn had struck her down, and she had come anyway, up the coast and through the breach, 40 years of loyalty and rage in her thin arms, and Antonio Moretti never saw her at all. She swung the rebar into the back of his knee. He screamed and buckled, and the gun jerked away from Maria's head, and Maria did the only thing her body knew how to do. She twisted, hard, protecting the baby, and drove her elbow back into Antonio's throat with all the strength that terror and fury could lend her. He went down choking. And then Vittorio crossed the room in 3 strides, and there was a single, flat, echoing shot, and Antonio Moretti stopped moving. Silence. Maria stood in the smoke and the ruin, Matteo howling against her, and looked at the dead man on the floor. and then at Vittorio, gun still raised, chest heaving, and then at Renata, who had dropped the rebar and was standing over the body of the boy she'd just helped kill with an expression of terrible, ancient grief. "It's done," Renata said hollowly. "It's done, Vittorio. Get them out. Get them out now, before more come." Vittorio holstered one gun and reached for Maria, and she went to him, and he wrapped an arm around her and the baby both and steered them toward the breach, over the rubble, out into the grey sea light. There was a boat at the shattered dock, engine running, one of Vittorio's men at the wheel. There were other bodies on the ground that Maria made herself not look at. The world smelled of gunpowder and the sea. They were halfway to the boat when Vittorio stopped. "Wait." He turned back toward the boathouse. "The samples. Antonio said they were collecting samples for a Moretti-controlled test. If they've already sent tissue to a lab—" "They hadn't," Maria said quickly. "They were about to, just now. That's when you—" She stopped. "Vittorio, there's something more important. Antonio didn't plan any of this. He as good as admitted it. Someone came to him, gave him the whole scheme, financed it, told him Sophia was his family's spy. Someone who wanted both families to tear each other apart." She gripped his coat. "It's her. It was always her. He was being run by Isabella. I'm certain of it now. And the second he became a liability—" Understanding and rage warred in Vittorio's face. He looked back at the boathouse, at the dead, spoiled boy inside who had been someone's puppet, and Maria watched the last pieces lock into place behind his eyes. "Then we've done exactly what she wanted," he said slowly, and the horror of it dawned on him fully. "I've just killed the Moretti heir. I've just started a war with the Morettis that can't be stopped now. And she's home, safe, waiting, watching two families she hates destroy each other." His jaw clenched. "Get in the boat. We're going home, and this ends tonight, one way or another, with my sister." They didn't go to Belmar. Vittorio wasn't a fool. If Isabella had orchestrated the kidnapping, then Belmar might be a trap. He took them instead to the house in Gloucester, smaller, defensible, staffed only by men whose loyalty he'd personally bought and tested over years. That night, after Matteo was finally, mercifully asleep, and Renata had been bandaged and put to bed with a doctor's care and a granddaughter's tenderness, Maria and Vittorio sat in a small, warm kitchen and tried to make sense of the wreckage. "Tell me everything," Vittorio said, "from the beginning. Everything you saw, everything you heard, in order. You're the only one who's seen all the pieces." So she told him. The records that showed slow poisoning, the garden and the second phone, and the way we handled the singer. Antonio's soft, spoiled certainty, and the doubt she'd cracked open in him. The samples they'd been about to collect, and the figure in red at the upstairs window as they dragged her to the boat, watching, raising one hand. "She watched them take you," Vittorio said. His hands were flat on the table. "From my house, and she waved." "Vittorio, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you do anything." Maria drew a breath. "The private test, the one that came back saying Matteo is yours, I believe it. But you own that lab. Antonio was right about that much. Anyone can say a test you control was rigged. So I did something. Before we left Belmar, the morning the results came." She reached into her bag and drew out a second sealed envelope, its lab logo different from the first. "I ran my own
Independently. A lab I trust, a colleague from residency. No connection to your family or the Morettis. I sent Matteo's swab and a hair I took from your comb under fake names. Priority. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to give you hope until I was sure. It came back yesterday. I've been carrying it since. Vittorio stared at the envelope. You tested my son behind my back. I tested him so that when the whole world says your lab lied, we'll have an answer no one can touch. Maria pushed the envelope across the table. Open it. See for yourself. This is the one that's really true. He opened it with hands that were, for the first time since she'd known him, openly trembling. He read it, and Maria watched his shoulders drop and his eyes close, and a long breath leave him. He's mine, Vittorio said. Confirmed. Independent. He laughed, a broken, exhausted sound. You beautiful, impossible, terrifying woman. You built us a wall out of the one thing no one can burn down. There's more, Maria said quietly. Look at the second page, the one that lists the incidental findings. He turned the page, frowned. I don't understand what I'm looking at. When you run a full genetic panel, Maria said, you get more than paternity. You get markers, family relationships, if you have samples to compare against. I sent one more sample with Matteo's and yours. She swallowed. A cigarette butt. Isabella's. I took it from the garden the day I followed her. I don't even know why. Instinct, the doctor in me hoarding data. I had them run it too. To confirm she's your full sister, that she's really Russo blood, that there wasn't some old family secret at the root of all her rage. She met his eyes. She is. She's your full biological sister. That part's true. But there's something else on that page, Vittorio. Something I don't think even Isabella knows. He read it again. And then again. And Maria watched him not understand, and then begin to understand, and then go absolutely white. The report showed a partial genetic match between the cigarette sample, Isabella, and Matteo, beyond what aunt and nephew would share. Elevated. The kind of shared markers you saw in a closer relationship. That's not possible, Vittorio whispered. It's not what you think, Maria said gently, because she'd had a day to sit with it, and he'd had 30 seconds. It doesn't mean what your fear is telling you it means. Isabella is Matteo's aunt, your sister. That's all confirmed. But the elevated markers point to something on the maternal side, Sophia's side. She paused. Vittorio. I think Sophia and Isabella were related, cousins maybe, close ones. The math fits a first-cousin relationship threaded through both lines. The kitchen was silent, except for the tick of an old clock. Sophia, Vittorio said slowly, was my sister's cousin. Which means Isabella didn't just happen to hate Sophia, Maria said. She knew her, before the club, before you. Isabella could have been the one who placed her there, sent her own cousin into your life as a singer, close to you, watching you, maybe even meant to be loyal to Isabella and not to you at all. And then Sophia did the one thing that ruined the plan. Her voice softened. She fell in love with you for real, and she got pregnant. And a real heir, a child you loved, was the one thing Isabella could never allow, because it ended her forever. So she poisoned her own cousin, slowly, and then she rewrote the story into a Moretti plot, to bury her own fingerprints under a war. Vittorio set the paper down very carefully, as though it might detonate. "My sister," he said, "murdered my son's mother, her own blood, and then handed my son to my enemies to be used as a weapon against me. And she has been sleeping under my roof, eating at my table, holding my child this entire time." "Yes," Maria said, "I think that's exactly what happened." He stood. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark Atlantic. And when he turned back, his face was the coldest and most terrible thing Maria had ever seen. Grief and love and betrayal all burned down to a single hard point. "Then tomorrow," Vittorio said, "I go home, and I end it." Maria didn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed of the Gloucester house, with Matteo breathing softly in the bassinet beside her, and she stared at the ceiling and had, at last, the conversation with herself that she'd been avoiding for weeks. She was in love with him. Not infatuated, not confused by proximity and danger and the strange, forced intimacy of playing house with a stranger. In love. The real thing, the deep-rooted, terrifying thing, the kind that reorganizes a person's future around another person's survival. She had fallen in love with Vittorio Russo, a man who 2 hours ago had walked through gunfire and killed to save her, a man who tomorrow intended to execute his own sister. And that was the horror she'd been circling. Because loving him meant loving all of him. It meant loving the tenderness with which he held his son, and the flat, cold eyes he'd worn in the boathouse. It meant that the same devotion that made her safe made him a killer. You could not have one without the other. The gentleness and the violence came from the same root, an absolute consuming loyalty to what was his. She was his now. That was the whole terrible gift. And Sophia, God, Sophia. Maria had delivered her child and held her hand while she died, and now Maria lay in the dark, loving the man Sophia had loved, sleeping in the world Sophia had died in. She felt like a thief. She felt like she'd stolen a dead woman's whole life, her lover, her child, her place at the table, and the fact that none of it had been intended, that she'd been dragged into it against her will, didn't ease the guilt at all. But underneath the guilt was a harder truth, and Maria was too honest a woman to hide from it. Sophia had been a player in this world, a piece someone else had moved onto the board. And Matteo was innocent. And Matteo was hers now, not by blood, but by every other thing that made a mother. By the hands that had pulled him breathing into the world, by the nights of walking him through the dark, by the fact that she would, without a flicker of hesitation, die for him. She had learned that about herself on a lawn by the sea, with 3 armed men closing in. She had put her body between him and the guns, and felt no fear for herself at all, only for him. That was motherhood. Blood had nothing to do with it. So the question wasn't whether she loved them. She did. The question was whether she could live here, in this world of blown-out walls and bodies on the floor and men who solved problems with guns. Whether she could raise a child in it, whether she could lie beside Vittorio for the rest of her life, knowing what his hands had done, would do again, would have to keep doing to keep them all
breathing. Around 3 in the morning, the connecting door opened. This house had one too, and Vittorio stood in the frame, and he didn't turn the handle uninvited, she realized. The door had been unlocked. She'd left it unlocked, and he'd knocked so softly she'd almost missed it. "I can't sleep either," he said. She moved over. He lay down beside her, on top of the covers, still in his clothes, and they looked at the ceiling together, and the baby breathed between their worlds. "Ask me not to do it," Vittorio said quietly. "Tomorrow. Ask me not to, and I'll find another way. Exile her, send her somewhere she can't reach us. I'll do it if you ask." Would that work? A long silence. "No," he admitted. "She'd come back. Or she'd send others. She's already killed her own cousin and traded my son to our enemies. She will never stop, Maria. Not while any of us breathe. Exile is just a slower way to bury us." "Then you already know I can't ask you not to." Maria turned her head to look at him. "That's the thing I've been lying awake understanding. I hate it. I hate that this is the only answer. I'm a doctor. I spent my whole life learning to keep people alive, and now I'm lying in bed agreeing that a person needs to die. And the worst part is that I do agree, because I did the math, because she'll kill him if she isn't stopped, because I've held that baby while men tried to take him." Her voice cracked. "So no, I won't ask you not to. But I need you to understand what it costs me to say that. I need you to know that I know exactly what we're becoming." Vittorio reached over, careful of the sleeping baby, and took her hand. "When this is over," he said, "you can leave. The contract stands. 3 years or 3 days. You can walk out with the money and the new name and never look back. And I will let you go. And I will never come after you. And I will spend the rest of my life grateful that you saved my son and glad that you got out." He squeezed her hand. "I mean that. I need you to know I mean that. Because I will not be one more man who tracked a woman in this world against her will. I've watched that story. I won't write it again." Maria was quiet for a long time. "And if I don't want to leave?" she asked. His hand tightened on hers hard, and she heard him stop breathing. "Then I would spend every day of the rest of my life," Vittorio said, his voice rough as broken stone, "trying to be worth the choice. And failing, probably, but trying." "That's not the answer of a cold and dangerous man," Maria whispered. "You ruined the cold and dangerous man," Vittorio said. "The night you told him to get out of his own bedroom." And in the dark for just a moment, they both almost smiled, and the baby slept on between them, and outside the ocean kept its endless, patient counsel, and somewhere to the south, a woman in red was planning all their deaths. They returned to Belmare the next afternoon, and Isabella was waiting for them, and she was very glad to see them, which was the most chilling thing of all. "You're alive!" She swept down the front steps, arms open, her beautiful face a portrait of relieved joy. "Vittorio, my God, when they took Maria and the baby, I've been sick with worry. I called everyone. She reached for Maria, for the baby, and Maria stepped back, and Isabella's eyes flickered just once before the mask smoothed over. "You must be exhausted, cara, both of you. Let me help with Matteo." "He's fine," Maria said. "I've got him." "Of course." Isabella turned to her brother, and her performance was flawless, and if Maria hadn't heard her in the garden, hadn't seen her wave from the window, she might almost have believed it. "The Morettis, is it handled? Tell me it's handled, Vittorio. Tell me those animals will pay for what they—" "Antonio's dead," Vittorio said. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth. "Dead?" "I killed him myself, in the boathouse where he was holding my wife and son." Vittorio's voice was perfectly even, perfectly calm, and Maria, who now knew what that calm concealed, felt her blood run cold on Isabella's behalf. "It's not handled, Bella. It's begun. The Morettis will want blood for their heir. There's going to be a war now." "A real one." He watched his sister's face. "Isn't that a shame?" "It's a tragedy," Isabella agreed, and if there was the faintest gleam of satisfaction in her dark eyes, she hid it well. "But we'll survive it. This family always survives. Come inside, you're all frozen. I'll have Renata draw a—" She stopped, looked around. "Where is Renata?" "Resting," Vittorio said. "She was hurt in the rescue." Renata was there. And now something genuine crossed Isabella's face, surprise, and beneath it the first flicker of unease. Because Renata had been in the boathouse, Renata had seen, Renata knew things. "At her age, my God, she could have been killed. I'll go up and—" "Leave her be," Vittorio said, and there was iron under the words now, and Isabella heard it, and her eyes narrowed a fraction. They went inside. Dinner was served, a strange, poisonous parody of a family meal, the four of them at the long table, Isabella charming and warm and probing, Vittorio granite, Maria watching everyone's hands near everyone's food, Renata absent. Isabella talked about the war to come, about which capos could be trusted, about how they'd need to consolidate, and Maria understood she was already positioning herself, already laying the groundwork to be indispensable in the chaos she'd created. It was after dinner, when Isabella had gone up and Vittorio was making the quiet calls that would gather his most loyal men to the house by morning, that Isabella made her move. Maria had gone to the nursery to put Matteo down. She had the baby against her shoulder, was swaying him towards sleep, humming, when she felt, rather than heard, the door open behind her. "He really is beautiful," Isabella said softly. "It's a pity, in a way. All that beauty, wasted on being the wrong child at the wrong time." Maria turned slowly, keeping the baby behind her shoulder, and Isabella was leaning in the doorway with a glass of red wine in one hand and something else in the other. Something small and dark that Maria's eye caught and identified in a heartbeat. Because she was a doctor, because she knew the shape of a loaded syringe. "Isabella," Maria said carefully, "whatever you're thinking of doing, you've been busy, doctor." Isabella's voice had lost all its warmth. What was left was cold and clear and almost admiring. "Running tests, reading records, following me through my brother's garden. Did you think I didn't see you? I saw you. I let you hear enough to frighten you, and not enough to hang me. But I underestimated you. You went further than frightened. You went digging." She took a sip of wine. "You know, I've been trying to decide, all through that tedious dinner, what exactly you figured out. So tell me, sister to sister, what do you think you know?" Maria's mind raced. Matteo, warm against her, the syringe in Isabella's hand, the door, Isabella between her and the door,
The monitor on the dresser, still on, still broadcasting to the receiver Vittorio carried on his belt as he made his calls 2 floors down. The monitor is on. "I know you poisoned Sophia," Maria said clearly, loudly, angling herself toward the little device. "Thallium or arsenic, over months, until her body failed in childbirth. I know she was your cousin, that you planted her in Vittorio's life years ago, and she betrayed your plan by falling in love with him for real. I know you couldn't stand that a real heir would cut you out of the succession forever. And I know you sold this whole family to the Morettis, fed Antonio the lie that Sophia was his spy, financed the custody claim, engineered the kidnapping, because you wanted both families to bleed each other white so you could pick up the pieces." Isabella was very still. Then she smiled, slow and genuine and utterly without remorse. "My God," she said, "you got all of it. Every piece." She set down her wine glass with a soft click. "That's a shame, Doctor. That really is. Because now I can't just make you a sad little postpartum suicide. Now I have to make it hurt." She raised the syringe. "Do you know what I never counted on? My brother, of all the cold bastards in this world, falling in love, with the help, with a doctor from Revere." She took a step into the room. "You're the open door, Maria. You're how I finally get to him. And the beautiful thing is, when you're dead, he'll be so broken, he'll walk into any trap I set." "He can hear you," Maria said quietly. Isabella paused. "What?" "The baby monitor." Maria nodded at the dresser. "It's been on this whole time. He carries the receiver. He's heard every word you just said." For one frozen second, Isabella Russo's beautiful face went slack with the dawning of the only real fear Maria had ever seen on it. And then the nursery door filled with the shape of her brother. Vittorio stood in the doorway with the baby monitor's receiver still clutched in one hand and his gun in the other. And for a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. "Put it down, Bella," Vittorio said. Isabella did not put the syringe down. Her hand stayed raised, the needle catching the soft lamplight, and her eyes moved from her brother's gun to his face and back again, calculating, always calculating. "So," Isabella said, "you heard?" "I heard." Vittorio's voice was terrible in its evenness. "Step away from her, away from my son, now." "Or what? You'll shoot me?" Isabella laughed, a bright, brittle sound. "You won't shoot me, Vittorio. I'm your sister. I'm the only family you have left in this world, the only person who remembers Mama, who remembers the house on Prince Street, who held your hand at Papa's funeral. You've buried 4 siblings already. You won't put the 5th in the ground." She tilted her head, and the confidence in her was chilling, because she believed it. She genuinely believed her blood made her untouchable. "You can't. It's not in you. You're a killer, brother, but you're not a monster. Not to your own." "You poisoned Sophia," Vittorio said. "Your own cousin. You watched her waste away for months, and you smiled at my dinner table." "Sophia was a tool," Isabella snapped, and the mask fell away entirely now, and the real thing underneath was worse than Maria had imagined. Not cold, but hot, a lifetime of banked fury finally roaring free.
She was my tool, mine. I made her, I placed her, I gave her the one job that mattered, and she fell in love with you, the stupid, romantic little fool. She was supposed to keep you occupied and keep me informed, and instead she got herself pregnant and started dreaming about a family. A family. With you, as if there could be an heir that wasn't— Isabella's voice cracked. As if I would let her hand you a son and cut me out of everything I've bled for my entire life. Do you have any idea what it is to be the daughter in this family, Vittorio? To be smarter than every man at the table and watch them pass the crown to you, who never wanted it, who'd have given it all up for a nightclub singer, while I got nothing. Nothing. I built the shadow half of this family with my bare hands. The judges, the councilmen, the men who really move the money, those are mine. I made them, and I was going to inherit what I earned the day you died, childless. And then that girl ruined it with her womb. The nursery was silent. Matteo, blessedly, slept on against Maria's shoulder. So I unmade it, Isabella said, quieter now, the fury banking back into ice. I gave Sophia her medicine, a little at a time. I fed Antonio Moretti a story about spies and heirs. He was so hungry to believe he'd finally struck a blow against us. The poor, stupid boy. He never once wondered why the plan was so much cleverer than anything he'd ever managed alone. I set two families I hate against each other, and I sat back to watch them burn. And it worked, Vittorio. It's working right now. You killed the Moretti heir this morning. There's no stopping the war now. All I had to do was wait. Her eyes flicked to Maria, and remove the one variable I didn't plan for. The doctor who wouldn't stop digging. Isabella. Vittorio took a step into the room, and Maria saw what it cost him, saw the grief warring with everything else in his face. There's a war coming that I can end. Both families have lost enough. I can broker a peace. The Morettis will take blood money and a truce. They're exhausted too. It doesn't have to burn. But not while you're alive, to keep pouring oil on it. You'll never stop. You've told me so yourself. No, Isabella agreed. I never will. She smiled at him, almost gently. So here we are. You have a gun, and I have a needle. And between us is a woman you love and a child you'd die for. And you have to decide, little brother, whether you're finally the monster they always said you were. She raised the syringe another inch, angling it now not toward Maria, but toward the sleeping baby against Maria's shoulder. Because I can end the whole succession problem in 1 second, and you can't cross the room fast enough, can you? Isabella, don't! Maria twisted, putting her whole body between the needle and the child, and Isabella's eyes glittered. You see, Vittorio? She'll take it for him. She'd die for your son. She's more of a mother in 6 weeks than that singer would ever have. Vittorio fired. It was not a decision made in the moment, Maria understood later. It had been made in a cold kitchen in Gloucester the night before, made when Maria said, I won't ask you not to, made the moment Isabella angled a loaded syringe at a sleeping infant. Everything after that was only reflex. One shot, precise, into his sister's shoulder, not her heart. He could have taken the heart. He chose the shoulder. Isabella screamed and spun and dropped the syringe, and it shattered on the hardwood, and Vittorio was across the room in an instant, kicking the fragments away, his gun still trained on his sister as she crumpled against the wall, clutching her ruined shoulder, blood welling black between her fingers. You shot me! she gasped, staring up at him with pure astonishment. "You actually—" "In the shoulder," Vittorio said, and his voice was breaking now, the granite finally cracking. "Because some coward's part of me still can't put you in the ground where you belong. Because you're right, God help me. You're my sister, and I can't—" He stopped. His hand was shaking. "Renata!" he roared toward the hall. "Salvatore! Here! Now!" Footsteps thundered, and Maria stood pressed against the far wall with the baby, watching the man she loved stand over his bleeding sister with a gun he couldn't quite bring himself to fire again. And she understood that this was the moment the whole story had been driving toward all along, and that it was not over yet. Because Isabella, even shot, even bleeding, was smiling. "You should have killed me," she whispered. "Now I get to watch you try to live with all of it." They did not call an ambulance. Of course they didn't. In that world, a bullet wound generated paperwork, and paperwork generated questions. And questions were the one thing Vittorio Russo could not afford. Instead, Maria, the doctor, always the doctor, no matter what else she'd become, stopped Isabella's bleeding on the nursery floor, while the woman who'd tried to murder her child watched her with hooded, hateful eyes. "You're saving my life," Isabella observed as Maria packed the wound. "You, of all people. How very Hippocratic." "I'm keeping you alive so you can answer for what you did," Maria said flatly, not looking up. "There's a difference." She tied off the pressure bandage harder than she strictly needed to, and had the grim satisfaction of watching Isabella wince. "You don't get to die clean in a nursery and become a tragedy Vittorio has to carry. You're going to live, and you're going to tell the truth, all of it, in front of everyone who matters in this family." That, it turned out, was Vittorio's plan too. He gathered them in the great room at Belmar, the capos, the lieutenants, the old men who'd served his father, the whole council of the Russo family, summoned in the dead of night to the mansion by the sea. Maria was not supposed to be there. It was not a place for wives, let alone women who were wives only on paper. But Vittorio put his hand at the small of her back and walked her in beside him, and when one of the old men opened his mouth to object, Vittorio looked at him, and the man closed it again. Isabella was brought in on a chair, pale from blood loss, arms strapped to her chest, guarded on both sides. And Vittorio stood before the family he ruled and told them everything. He held up two documents, the independent paternity test and the genetic report showing Isabella's link to Sophia. He laid out the poisoning, Sophia's medical records, the pattern only a doctor could read, and he'd had Maria explain it, plainly, clinically, in language these hard men could follow. He revealed the collusion with Antonio Moretti, the manufactured custody claim, the kidnapping that Isabella had waved goodbye to from an upstairs window. And finally, damningly, he played it. The recording, captured by the baby monitor's receiver, of Isabella's own voice confessing all of it in the nursery 2 hours before. "She was my tool. I gave Sophia her medicine. I set two families I hate against each other." The great room was silent when it finished. An old capo named Don Ciro, who had known Vittorio since he was a boy, rose slowly to his feet. "She sold this family to the Morettis," he said, in a voice like gravel.
She killed a woman carrying the boss's child. She raised her hand against the heir. He looked at Isabella, and there was no mercy in it, only the terrible arithmetic of their world. There is only one answer for this, Vittorio. You know the law. We all know the law. It does not matter that she is your blood. It matters more that she is your blood. Because if the boss's own sister can betray the family and live, then no one need fear the law again. He sat. It has to be you, and it has to be tonight. Maria felt Vittorio go rigid beside her. "There's another way," she said before she could stop herself, and every hard old face in the room turned to her, and she felt Vittorio's warning hand on her arm, and she ignored it. "I'm a doctor. I've spent my life finding the answer that keeps someone alive, so hear me out." She met Don Ciro's flinty gaze. "She's more valuable alive than dead. She built the shadow half of this family, the judges, the money men, the connections. Kill her and you lose all of that overnight, and half of it turns on you. But if she lives, locked away, controlled, cut off from everyone, forced to sign over every network she built, then Vittorio inherits her whole shadow empire and ends the war. She becomes the leash you put on the Morettis. A living hostage is worth more than a dead traitor." Murmurs moved through the room. Don Ciro's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Maria thought perhaps she'd found the answer. The doctor's answer, the one where no one else died. Then Isabella laughed. "Oh, that's good, doctor." She lifted her head, pale and bleeding and radiant with contempt. "That's clever, but you don't understand what you're offering, because you don't understand me. You put me in a cage, and I will spend every single day of my life reaching through the bars. I'll turn your guards. I'll poison your wine. I'll write letters, whisper to visitors, find the weakness in every wall you build. I told you already, little brother, I will never, ever stop. You can put me anywhere on this earth, and I will find a way to reach your wife's throat and your son's cradle." She smiled, and it was the smile of someone who has nothing left to lose and has made her peace with it. "So no, there's no cage, there's only the ground, and the only question left is whether my brother has the stomach to put me in it, or whether he'll cage me and lie awake every night knowing I'm coming." Her eyes gleamed. "I know which. I've known him his whole life. He'll cage me. He's soft. He was always soft." She was, Maria realized with a sick lurch, choosing this, goading him, because a dead Isabella would haunt Vittorio forever, would be the thing that finally broke something in him, and even now, even at the end, she wanted to win, wanted to reach through her own death to wound him. Vittorio was very quiet. Then he turned to Maria and took both her hands, and for a moment it was as though the whole room fell away and there were only the two of them. "You tried," he said softly. "You tried to find the answer where no one else dies. That's who you are. That's why—" He stopped, kissed her forehead. "But she's right about the cage, and she's right that I'm soft. I've been soft my whole life, and it's cost me everyone I ever loved. I won't let it cost me you, or him." He released her hands. "Take my wife and my son upstairs, Renata." "Vittorio, please," he said,
and it was the same broken pleas she'd heard on the phone at midnight 2 months ago, the word from a place buried deep in him. Don't watch this. I don't want you to watch this. Let me carry it alone. Let there be one thing about tonight you never have to see. And Renata's gentle old hands were on Maria's shoulders, turning her toward the stairs, and Maria went, because there are moments a person is not meant to witness, and this was his, and she loved him enough to let him have it in the dark. She was on the stairs when she heard Isabella's voice one last time, low and almost tender. There he is. There's my brother. She was at the top of the stairs when she heard the shot. The house was very quiet in the days that followed. They buried Isabella in the family plot, beside the 4 siblings who'd gone before her, beside their mother and father, under a stone that gave only her name and her years, and no hint of what she'd been. Vittorio arranged it himself and stood at the graveside in the rain with his son in his arms, and Maria stood beside him and Renata beside her, and no one else came, because there was no one left who could be trusted to know how she died. Vittorio did not speak of it. For 3 days he barely spoke at all. He moved through the great house like a man under water, and he held Matteo for hours, and Maria let him be, because grief has its own weather, and you cannot hurry the storm. On the 4th night she found him in the nursery. Of course the nursery, the room where it had happened, the room he kept returning to as though he could rewrite it, sitting on the floor with his back against the crib and his head in his hands. She sat down beside him on the floor and said nothing. I keep waiting to feel like a monster, Vittorio said finally, his voice hoarse from disuse. Don Ciro was right. The law was right. She'd have killed you both. I know all of that. I did the necessary thing, but she was my sister. He lifted his head, and his eyes were red and raw and terribly young. I taught her to swim, did you know that? At the house on the Cape, when we were children. She was afraid of the water, and I held her up until she wasn't. I held her up. His voice broke completely. And I put her down. Maria took his hand. She didn't tell him it was okay, because it wasn't, and he would have known she was lying. She didn't tell him it wasn't his fault, because in some tangled way it was all of theirs and none of theirs. Instead, she said the only true thing she had. You didn't put her down, she said. She jumped. She stood in that room and she chose it. She chose it over the cage, over exile, over any way out I could find. She told you the exact thing that would force your hand, and she smiled while she said it. That wasn't you failing to save her, Vittorio. That was her refusing to be saved. There's a difference. I've watched a lot of people die. Some of them fight for every second, and some of them decide, and there's nothing on earth you can do. She squeezed his hand. She decided. Years ago, probably. You just held the gun. He turned to her, and something in his face cracked open. And then Vittorio Russo, feared across the whole city, a man who'd buried 5 siblings and killed the 6th, put his head in her lap and wept like a child, and Maria stroked his hair and stared at the wall and let him. The war with the Morettis ended, in the end, the way Vittorio had said it might. With Isabella dead and her double dealing exposed, the old Moretti Don, Antonio's father, was made to understand that his son had been a puppet in a Russo woman's game, that he had grieved an heir who died chasing a lie planted in his ear. There was a sit-down. There was blood money, paid both ways. There was a truce, brokered by Don Ciro and sealed the old way. And if it was not friendship, it was at least an end to the killing. The city's uneasy balance restored itself. The papers never printed a word of any of it, and slowly, week by week, the great house by the sea began to feel less like a fortress and more like a home. Matteo grew. He learned to smile, a real, wide, gummy smile that undid Vittorio completely the first time he saw it. He learned to grip and to roll and to shriek with delight at the sight of the ocean through the great windows. He was, by every measure Maria the doctor could apply, a thriving, healthy, ordinary baby, utterly innocent of the blood that had been spilled to keep him breathing. She watched Vittorio watch him and saw the grief in him, slowly, slowly making room for something else. Not replacing it, grief like his never leaves, but making room. Renata recovered from her wounds, though she moved more slowly now, and she took to sitting in the conservatory among the orange trees with the baby on her lap, telling him stories in Italian he was far too young to understand. He should hear them anyway, Renata told Maria, the good ones, not the ones about guns and blood. The ones about the old country, the food, the music. Somebody in this family should give him the good stories. She looked up at Maria with her ancient, knowing eyes. You'll stay then. I can see it. You've decided. I haven't decided anything, Maria said. Cara, Renata smiled. You decided the night you told a dangerous man to get out of his own bedroom, and then didn't run. The rest is just you catching up to yourself. Maria didn't answer, but that night she stood at the window of her suite, looking at the connecting door and its lock, and she thought about the contract in the safe downstairs. 3 years, renewable, with a clause for a clean exit and a new name and enough money to disappear. She thought about her old life, her practice, her patience, her mother in Revere, the quiet, ordinary, safe existence she'd been dragged out of at midnight 2 months ago. She thought about the small, warm weight of a baby who was not her blood and was entirely her heart. She thought about a man who had wept in her lap and offered, twice now, to let her go free. Then she crossed the room, and she turned the key in the connecting door, and she opened it. Vittorio was awake. He was always awake at that hour. Some wounds don't let a man sleep. He was standing at his own window with a glass of something amber and untouched in his hand. And when the connecting door opened, he went very still, and he did not turn around. You unlocked it, he said. I unlocked it. You've never unlocked it. His voice was carefully neutral, the voice of a man who has taught himself not to hope for things. In 2 months, not once. I know. Maria came to stand beside him at the window. The moon was out, laying a silver road across the black water. I've been thinking about the contract. She felt him brace. Maria, if you want to go, the offer stands. I meant every word. I'd have it all arranged by morning. The money, the name, I don't want to go. Silence. She heard him set the glass down on the sill, very carefully, as though his hands weren't quite steady. I need to say all of it, Maria said, and I need you to let me finish, because I've been building it in my head for days, and if you interrupt, I'll lose my nerve. She took a breath. I never wanted this. I want to be clear about that for both of us, so there's no lie between us ever. I did not choose to fall in love with a mafia boss. I answered a phone at midnight to save a life, the way I'd answered 100 phones before, and it cost me my whole world. And I've grieved that world, Vittorio. My practice, my name, the version of my life where I was just a doctor who did good and went home. That woman is gone, and I've mourned her. I know, he said quietly. I've watched you mourn her. I've hated myself for it. Don't. Let me finish. She turned to face him. Because here's the thing I finally understood standing at my window tonight. That woman, the one I mourned, she was safe. And she was lonely. She went home every night to an empty apartment, and she loved her patients because she didn't have anyone else to love. She was a good doctor and a half-lived person, and I didn't even know it until I got dragged into a world that's dangerous and dark and soaked in blood, and found, in the middle of all of it, the first thing I've ever loved more than my own safety. Her voice trembled. Two things, actually. A baby who's mine in every way that matters, and a man who walks through gunfire for the people he loves, and then comes home and weeps in my lap because he can't bear what he had to do to keep them alive. That man. She reached up and touched his face. You told me I don't yet know what you'll do for the people you love. I know now. I've seen it. It terrifies me, and it's the most honest thing I've ever witnessed. And God help me, I don't want to live anywhere it isn't. Vittorio caught her hand against his cheek and held it there, and she could feel him shaking. You should be afraid of me, he said roughly. You said so yourself. I am afraid of you. I told you weeks ago. I've just found that being afraid isn't very useful, so I've decided to love you instead. A wet laugh escaped her. It's a terrible decision. My mother would be horrified. Every rational cell in my body is filing an objection. But I've spent my whole life being rational and safe, and I have never once been as alive as I am in this impossible, bloody, beautiful place with the two of you. So, she lifted her chin. I'm not signing the exit clause. I'm tearing up the contract, not because I have to, because I want to, because I choose it. Do you understand the difference? Everyone in your life came to you by blood or by force or by fear. I'm coming to you by choice, fully, with my eyes open the way Renata told me to. She smiled through the tears. Eyes open, Vittoria. And I'm still here. For a long moment he just looked at her, this man who had lost so much and trusted so little, searching her face as though he could not believe it was real, as though a lifetime in a world of lies had left him unable to recognize the truth when it finally stood in front of him, offering itself freely. Then he made a sound, low in his chest, half a sob and half her name, and he pulled her into him and kissed her the way a drowning man reaches the surface, desperate and grateful and disbelieving. Say it again, he breathed against her mouth. The part about choosing. Say it again, I need to hear it again. I've never... I choose you, Maria said. I choose him. I choose this, all of it, the danger and the darkness and the good stories Renata's going to tell him and the whole impossible thing. I'm not your legal foster mother, Vittorio. I'm not your paper wife or your insurance or a thread someone might pull. I'm his mother. I'm your wife. For real, if you'll have me.
If I'll have you. He laughed, broken and joyful all at once, and pressed his forehead to hers. I have wanted nothing else since the moment you told me to get out of my own bedroom. You've owned me since before I understood I was owned. There was never any question of whether I'd have you, only whether I had the right. His hands framed her face. Do I have the right? After everything, after Sophia, after the blood, after what I am, do I get to have this? You don't get to have it, Maria said softly. You get to earn it. Every day, the way you said in Gloucester. And so do I. That's what it is, when you choose it instead of being handed it. It's work. She smiled. Lucky for you, I'm not afraid of hard work. Ask any resident I ever trained. Down the hall, through the nursery monitor that neither of them had thought to turn off, Matteo woke and made a small, questioning sound into the dark. They went to him together. 1 year later, on a warm evening in early summer, there was a party at the great house by the sea. It was not, by the standards of that family, a large one. There were no capos, no lieutenants, no old men from the council. Vittorio had drawn a hard line over the past year between the business and the home, the killing and the cradle, as Renata put it, and this evening belonged entirely to the second. There were paper lanterns strung along the terrace, and a long table laden with the food Renata had spent 2 days cooking, and music from an old record player, and the ocean going gold, and then rose, and then violet as the sun sank into it. Matteo Russo, 1 year old, took his first steps that evening on the terrace by the sea. He'd been threatening it for weeks, hauling himself up on the furniture, cruising along the low wall, releasing his grip for a heart-stopping half-second before dropping back onto his diapered bottom with a look of profound betrayal. But that evening, in the gold light, with the whole small world he possessed watching, he let go of the leg of the table, and he stood, swaying, arms out like a tiny drunken tightrope walker, and he looked across the terrace at Maria. "Come here," Maria said, crouching, arms open. "Come to me. You can do it, amore. Come to Mama." Mama. She'd started saying it months ago, testing it, and it had stopped feeling like a lie somewhere along the way, stopped feeling like a costume she was wearing for a dead woman, and become simply true. She was his mother. She had pulled him breathing into the world, and she had walked him through 10,000 dark hours, and she had put her body between him and men with guns, and blood had nothing to do with any of it. Matteo took one step, wobbled, took another. And then, with a shriek of triumphant delight, he half walked and half fell the last few feet into Maria's arms, and she caught him, and stood and spun him around, and the terrace erupted, Renata clapping, Vittorio's face breaking into the wide, unguarded smile Maria had spent a year coaxing out of him, a smile he now gave freely, a smile that had once seemed as impossible as the sunrise. "Did you see?" Maria laughed, her eyes wet. "Did you see him? He walked." "I saw." Vittorio crossed to them and wrapped them both in his arms, his wife and his son, the two people for whom he had done every terrible and necessary thing, and he pressed a kiss to Maria's hair and then to Matteo's, and for a moment the three of them simply stood there in the gold light. Whole. The child of two bloodlines. That was what the Morettis had called him in their poisoned letter a lifetime ago.
a phrase meant as a threat, a claim, a weapon. But it had turned out to mean something else entirely, because Matteo Russo was indeed the child of two bloodlines, but not the ones anyone had schemed over. He was the child of the woman who had given birth to him and died with his cry in her ears. Sophia, who they would tell him about someday, the good stories, the way she loved old films and sang French songs and gave her life to bring him into the world. And he was the child of the woman who had chosen him, freely, with her eyes open, in the middle of a world designed to break her. Two bloodlines, the one that made him and the one that kept him. The blood he was born from and the blood that would have been spilled to the last drop before anyone touched him. Later, when the lanterns had burned low and Matteo was asleep and Renata had gone up to bed, Maria and Vittorio sat together on the terrace wall, with the dark ocean below and the whole spangled city glittering far down the coast. "Do you ever regret it?" Vittorio asked quietly. It was a question he asked in some form every few months. Not from insecurity exactly, but because a man who has lost everyone he ever loved never fully stops bracing for the next loss. Answering the phone, that night, all of it. Maria considered it seriously, the way she considered everything, because he deserved a true answer and not a comfortable one. "I regret that Sophia died," she said. "I'll always regret that I couldn't save her. And I'll always carry the strangeness of loving the life she was supposed to have. That never goes away. I don't want it to. It keeps me honest, and it keeps her real. And someday, it'll help me tell him the truth about where he comes from." She leaned her head on Vittorio's shoulder. "But do I regret answering the phone? No. Because if I hadn't, that baby up there would have died in a penthouse with no one who knew what to do. And I never would have known that I was capable of this, of loving something more than my own life, of choosing a hard, beautiful, terrifying thing over a safe, empty one." She laced her fingers through his. "I was a good doctor, Vittorio, but I was only half a person. You and Matteo, you're the other half. I don't regret being made whole, even at this price, even in this world." He was quiet for a long time, turning her wedding ring, a real one now, replacing the paper, around her finger with his thumb. "I don't deserve you," he said finally. "No," Maria agreed, and felt him huff a startled laugh. "You don't. Nobody deserves the people who love them. That's what makes it a gift, instead of a wage." She turned and kissed him, slow and sure, this dangerous man she had chosen with her eyes open. "But you can earn it. Every day." We agreed. "Every day," Vittorio said against her lips, like a vow, like the only prayer he still believed in. "For the rest of my life." Above them the stars came out over the Atlantic, indifferent and eternal, and below them the ocean kept its patient, endless counsel, and between them, in the great house that had once been a fortress and was now, at last, a home, a child of two bloodlines slept on, safe and loved, and entirely unaware that he was the reason two hardened souls had learned, against all the odds of their bloody world, how to choose the light. The phone did not ring at midnight. For the first time in a very long time, it simply, blessedly, did not ring at all.